How much is a life worth? How much are 100 lives worth? 1,000, 10,000?
In the Gulf, 1,700 coalition aircraft now prepared to attack. They faced modern Iraqi fighters, many built by the French and Soviets, hundreds of missile batteries, and thousands of anti-aircraft guns. At one stage, Pentagon estimates suggested 1 in 5 aircraft in the first attack might be shot down.
We were filled with uncertainty. Our press had been telling us that our generals couldn't general, that our technology didn't work, and our young people were no good. Now, we didn't believe it, but we worried about it because it was sort of imbued in our whole national psyche. Vietnam was a ghost we carried with us.
The air planners' first targets were not the 400,000 Iraqi troops in and around Kuwait, but key strategic political and military targets in Baghdad and all over Iraq. Some hoped that for the first time in history, air power alone would bring victory.
I thought the strategic campaign would not only work, but that it would be bordering on unbelievably successful. And that was based on the fact that technology had finally caught up with the vision that we'd always had of how to apply a strategic air campaign.
Imagine Iraq like a human body. What happens if you take away somebody's ability to think, somebody's ability to communicate with the rest of the body? What happens if you sever their spinal cord? They can't function, right?
Before the planes could attack, Task Force Normandy would fire the first shots of the war. Its Apache gunships had been training for months. Their mission was vital, to destroy at all costs 2 Iraqi radar sites that would otherwise give Baghdad an early warning of what was to come. It was a moonless night. 8 Apaches armed with Hellfire missiles took off towards Iraq. This is a pilot's eye view, videotape from one helicopter's night vision camera. The gunships flew just a few feet off the desert until they were 8 miles from the radar dishes.
We slowed our airspeed to about 40 knots, came up on line, all abreast, so we're all at the same distance from the target. And at this point, I'm not looking through my goggles, I'm looking at a TV screen right in front of me. Watched the clock tick to 0. I gave the code word, get some. At that point, everybody fired their Hellfires.
Get some. Second missile.
From a range of 4 miles, each crew aimed a laser beam that guided their missiles. The Iraqis had anti-aircraft guns but could not see or hear the helicopters. This was a new kind of war.
How'd you do? They're still in air. Okay. Hit that one, slide on the left. Hit that one. Okay.
With the initial blast of the Hellfire, then we really saw some activity in the target.
You're lined up. Firing. I see people running around now. All right. Hold her steady. Got it. Stay with it. There it goes.
I select my gun. I've got very bright flashes of light to my left and right as the Hellfires are leaving. People running around in the site, and underneath my goggles I can see the explosions. My wingman firing is 30 millimeter, the muzzle flashes from that.
Okay, did you get the
Out of the probably 150 people that we were briefed were at the site, I would imagine not more than 10 or 20 probably lived through that engagement.
Within 5 minutes of the time that the first aircraft were scheduled to hit their targets, General Schwarzkopf came in. The door opened. His senior military assistant announced the Commander-in-Chief of United States Central Command. And and he burst through the door and took his place at the table.
And then I asked the chaplain to say a prayer, and then I played God Bless the USA, a blatantly chauvinistic piece of music, but I think it characterized the pride that all of us had in our profession and in what we were. And there's a line in there that says, I would proudly stand next to you and defend her still today, and that's what it was all about. And I said, now we all know what we need to do, now let's get on with it.
That I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free.
Soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, this morning at 0300, we launched Operation Desert Storm.
Stand up next to you and defend her still today.
My confidence in you is total. Our cause is just. Now, you must be the thunder and lightning of Desert Storm. Planes were in the air at that time, heading towards their targets, with no guarantees of the outcome. To know that we had taken a very big step and that the war had started and none of us knew exactly how it was going to end, that's a very, very emotional moment.
Time to launch. 1 minute, sir.
In the Gulf, the Navy prepared to launch dozens of cruise missiles. But the missiles' guidance systems couldn't navigate over the flat desert of Iraq. They needed landmarks to lock onto. So they were secretly programmed to fly over the mountains of Iran and then turn towards Baghdad. The Iranians were told nothing, and no one knew exactly what would happen.
4, 3, 2, 1, launch.
Downtown Tehran would not have been a good mission. We were dealing with neighboring countries who we didn't want to join into the fray. We'd never used them in conflict before, and there was a lot of apprehension about, do we launch these things and then they make up their own mind where they're going?
By 2:25 in the morning, I was tired, sitting in the CNN workspace. I had an Englishman engineer, and I was sort of telling him, you know, it was a bust, we'd have to wait for another night. And then he started to hear, he claimed, dogs barking. And my hearing is not so good as the result of being in Vietnam for many years, but I too started to hear dogs barking. And he said, that has to be a signal. And I laughed and I said, dog radar? Come on. And 10 seconds after I'd made that memorable statement, the sound of anti-aircraft fire started.
Ten stealth bombers were just minutes away from downtown Baghdad. The stealth was designed to be invisible to radar, but to be safe, the Air Force started jamming Baghdad's radar defenses. The jamming gave the game away. The Iraqi radars were blinded, but 3,000 anti-aircraft guns and 60 missile batteries began firing wildly into the sky.
That night, orders came from headquarters to fire back any way we could, even if it meant closing our eyes and firing into the sky. You see, it was so dark, and the aircraft were coming so quickly, and we didn't have the capability to aim accurately. That's why they told us, put up a barrage of fire any way you can.
In the approaching stealth bombers, the pilots saw the firestorm of shells and missiles exploding above the city. They flew straight towards it.
As I'm flying in, the aircraft was actually being buffeted by the AAA exploding. Looking back, it's kind of like an old World War II movie where they sit in the cockpit of their B-29s and bounce around over Dresden.
Dolson's bomb destroyed Iraq's main telephone exchange.
I just remember looking over my shoulder, and I thought to myself, you know, it's a miracle. There's no way anybody else is coming out of there.
A minute behind, Dolson's wingman was still flying through the barrage.
Stuff going off all around you, under you, you know, some of it arcing over above you. I know that I've trained my whole Air Force career to make sure that I could do this, and now did I have the right stuff now?
Leatherman destroyed the main telephone tower. Another laser-guided bomb hit the headquarters controlling Baghdad's air defenses. Other pilots destroyed government ministries and a key communications tower. Also targeted, Saddam's lakeside palace.
What we wanted to do was sever his ability to communicate with his frontline forces. And if that meant killing him, then so be it.
Holy cow. That was a large airburst that we saw. It was filling the sky with dust. And I think, John, that airburst took out the telecommunications. Yeah. Now you may hear...
CNN gave a running account to the rest of the world. 6 minutes after the stealth bombers left, the cruise missiles arrived. Some destroyed government buildings. Others dropped carbon filament which shorted out the electrical grid system. The president and his advisors watched the war unfold on television.
This is one of those times when I really had a sense of history. I had the battle plan on my lap, and we were sitting here watching CNN, and to see the battle unfolding from the CNN parts, when the CNN announcer, a couple of minutes after the first radar should have been hit on the border, that we have reports of airstrikes down in the southern part of the country. So it was uncanny.
With Baghdad's air defense headquarters destroyed and its radar system in chaos, hundreds of Iraq's fighters couldn't operate. Only a few struggled into the air.
I see that somebody's targeted on me. It's an Iraqi fighter who wants to target me and shoot me down. And so I remember firing a missile. I remember seeing this big blue flame coming across the sky, 3 to 5 seconds long. And I remember seeing it, and then it goes away. I remember thinking to myself that my missile hit him and that the target's destroyed and that he's down, but what's ahead?
With hundreds of Allied aircraft flying, AWACS planes packed with computer equipment helped control the battle. That night, the coalition armada systematically attacked Iraq's war machine. The factories that made chemical and biological weapons, the Scud missile plants. In all, over 200 different targets were hit.
The first 24 hours consisted of more attacks in the master attack plan than the entire number of targets that were targeted in the years 1942 and 1943 during the combined bomber offensive in Europe.
That first night was a new benchmark in the history of warfare. The first time the world had seen precision bombing on a vast scale. And defying all expectations, only one Allied pilot, an American, had been killed.
And the whole world starts to watch this war in real time. And suddenly one of the first scenes coming off one of our airfields is of this F-16 landing. Rolls to a stop. Canopy pops open, pilot comes out. I met him later. His name is Jet Jernigan, of all. I mean, right out of Hollywood Central Casting. Jet Jernigan is the young man's name. And I'm watching this in real time in my office, and suddenly the youngster turns around to talk to the reporters. And I said, uh-oh. No telling what Jet Jernigan is liable to say to a pushy reporter. And what Jet Jernigan says is, I'll tell you what it was all about. He says, first, I want to thank God that I completed my mission successfully and I got back to my base safely.
Been a very fortunate fellow.
Sounds pretty good. American people hearing this. Confident, young American pilot. Starts to walk away and he looks over his shoulder a second time. He says,
Lord bless me with a good woman.
Oh. Starts to walk away again. He looks over his shoulder a third time. He says, I want to thank God that I'm an American. And then he looks over his shoulder a fourth time. He says, I want to thank God that I'm an American fighter pilot. I about swooned.
God bless America.
American people saw this spirit of confidence, spirit of professionalism. It was a feel-good that we had not seen since the end of World War II.
With air superiority established over the Iraqis, the coalition airplaners were now confident enough to launch conventional aircraft on massive daylight raids.
My squadron was part of a large armada of airplanes doing one of the first daylight raids over Baghdad. My particular target was an oil refinery on the bend in the river in Baghdad. A lot of people trying to shoot at us. Another couple of missiles are fired. We maneuver heavily to avoid those missiles, and they go by us very, very nicely. You know, one went by on my right. I could see two go by my wingman on his left and right. As I continued to roll my jet, I looked back over the right to where the missile would have gone, and there was a cloud of, just black and silver metal flying everywhere. And I thought, maybe I took a small hit. Well, in the nanosecond that it took me to roll up and look and make that assessment, my airplane just decided it's going to shut down, and all the systems just went boom. It's like somebody pulled the plug. And I thought, oh, Jesus, I'm hit. Engine quit, realized I was going to have to get out, and I just configured the aircraft as much as I possibly could to glide as far as I could. I wanted to get as far south as I could and as far away from the western edge of Iraq. Again, checked my map one more time and said, okay, I'm in the middle of nowhere, the sun's going down, this is not going to be too bad. Then all of a sudden, I see some clouds of smoke coming up, and I go, oh no, someone's shooting at me.
In Baghdad, Saddam Hussein was moving between safe houses in the suburbs. The bombing had been more devastating than he'd expected, without the civilian deaths he'd believed would outrage world opinion. His intelligence chief says Saddam's temper flared when he was briefed on the gravity of Iraq's situation.
I said, I know that Iraq will be destroyed. I am telling you the truth. Saddam said, these Americans are technicians, not soldiers who fight. They have technology on their side, but that won't help them win.
When Saddam met with his ministers after the first night's bombing, he had already ordered action he believed would shatter the coalition of Western and Arab countries attacking Iraq. Scud missile launchers hidden in the desert fired at Israel.
We had the capability, we did it. When you are attacked by an enemy, you attack your enemies. That's natural.
The Scuds were fired indiscriminately at Israel's largest city. Saddam calculated the Israelis would retaliate and join the conflict. The Arabs in the coalition would then refuse to fight alongside Israel. The coalition would collapse, and so would the war. Soon, more Scuds were on the way.
Well, I wasn't told. I heard them. And I rushed out of my home to go to our headquarters in the Defense Ministry, and on the way I heard the Scuds landing in the Tel Aviv area.
Israel's nuclear forces now went on full alert. 60 Israeli jets took to the skies. Early warning radar appeared to show Iraqi bombers headed for Israel. In the Pentagon, the defense secretary picked up the hotline to Tel Aviv. Israeli retaliation seemed inevitable.
Imagine an American president sitting quietly as missiles land on the United States saying, no, we're not going to do anything. I mean, that's an unacceptable political position for any government.
I think it was Cheney that called me, and I reported to him on the hits that we'd taken. I had no doubt that Israel was going to take action. The question was, action when, and what type of action?
The Israeli army reported nerve gas in the debris of one of the missiles. Israelis prepared for the worst.
We knew we had a real problem at this point, because if Israel got into the war, this was a real break for Saddam. If he provoked the Israelis into attacking him, then the chances of holding the coalition together really